Hi everyone, welcome to this fraud episode of the B2B Club. The B2B Club takes a fortnightly deep dive into topics ranging from marketing to marketplaces, personalizations to payments, revenue to regulation, and a lot more. So today's episode is a fraud-based podcast. We've got some topics that we're going to dive into. There's a few of us in the room. My name's Connor. I'm the fraud analyst at Hakodo. I'm also joined by our head of data science and fraud, Nico. Would you like to give a little bit of an introduction? Very brief.
Thanks for the intro, Connor. It's good to be doing this, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. I joined Hakodo a bit over 2 years ago now. I've got a background in payment, banking, and fraud analytics. Looking forward to our chat today.
Great, thanks very much. The other person in the room is Steve Goddard, a fraud expert who works at Featurespace. Featurespace is a company whose mission is to use technology to combat fraud and make the world a safest place for businesses and consumers. Steve, thanks very much for joining the podcast.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, guys.
Would you like to give a bit of an intro about yourself and your very interesting job title role?
Yeah, sure. So I am a fraud subject matter expert at Featurespace. I've been doing that for about 3 years now. And effectively what that is being the voice of the customer within the organization. Myself and my team have done the job of the people that we're selling to. You know, we've been fraud analysts, we've been fraud managers, we've run fraud teams. So we kind of know it inside and out. And we work with the marketing team, the commercial team, data science team, just kind of helping them understand customers and what we can do to give them a better experience.
That's great. Thanks. Looking forward to your insight. So, as I said a minute ago, we've got some main talking points that we want to sort of go into in the next however long this podcast ends up being. I'll break down the topics we're going to go into and then we'll just go through one by one, hopefully in a fairly fluid manner. One of the first things we want to talk about is how can we actually define fraud in lending and payments? How are new payment methods being targeted by fraudsters? How is fraud evolving in B2B context? And what methods can businesses use to protect themselves against fraud? So let's start off with the first one. So Nico, what is fraud and how do we define it in lending and payments?
That'd be interesting to get your view on this more. Generalist view.
I was thinking about this, trying to kind of boil it down to its simplest sort of definition, and effectively, it's obtaining funds by false pretenses. You want something that someone else has got, whether that's money, whether that's information, whatever it is. You are defrauding someone. You are lying to them. You are stealing. That's effectively what it is, and in this world, it's money. It's taking money from one person because you're greedy and you want that money.
Yeah, what I find sometimes be challenging working in an organization trying to prevent fraud is that it's easy to fall into quite specified use cases of potential fraud, and leaving some risk aside, not being managed by anyone else, thinking the job is doing by someone else. But
I mean, a lot of organizations kind of separate fraud and financial crime. When fraud is financial crime, it falls under different areas of different organizations. One, they see it over there, and then no one sees it over there, and then they don't often work together. We're seeing a proliferation now of FRAML, so fraud and money laundering teams together, which is great. But things like so that kind of definition, everybody sees it slightly differently, which means it's harder to find because everyone's looking at it from a slightly different way.
Yeah, the other aspect I find that sometimes harder to separate is the boundary between what's fraud risk versus what's credit risk. And, to businesses, it doesn't really matter. In the end, the business would want to get paid. But back to your very general definition, I think, part of the credit risk we're seeing and the willingness of someone to pay back their invoice or their loans or whatever else can easily, fall into this wider fraud definition.
Yeah, and then what we see is whether it, again, dependent on the organisation, whether they see it as fraud, whether they have the resources to investigate it to its fullest, or whether they just mark it down as bad debt. And then if they mark it down as bad debt and they're not seeing it as fraud, then there's so much fraud which is going undetected, and we don't know what we don't know. There's a big portion of fraud that people just aren't aware of because they're seeing it as something else. Again, not necessarily their fault, but they just don't have the resources to kind of investigate it fully and understand what the problem is. And then when they're trying to detect it and prevent it, they don't know what it is that they're trying to prevent and detect because they haven't kind of drilled down into it to that level, which is frustrating. But these are things that we have to deal with in this industry, unfortunately.
I think that's a really good way of talking about the issue that there is in fraud at the moment. I think a lot of the fraud just goes under the radar. I think a lot of companies, especially large companies and massive merchants, they might not be looking for certain types of fraud, and they might just put it down to bad buyers or bad debt. And I think there's probably a lot more fraud out there that's not being reported, and I think there's a real problem.
Again, different organisations see it different ways. From a merchant perspective, their number one priority is conversion rates. From an issuing bank, it's completely different. Fraud is a big deal to them. They have the regulations. They need to meet the scheme criteria. I mean, merchants do as well, but if they're under the kind of the limits, then it doesn't affect them as much as it could do. For them, they just want to get as many people across the through that payment as possible. So they will accept a certain proportion of fraud.
Yeah, and something you just mentioned, Connor, like a lot of the fraud is under the radar because of being unreported. I think that's something that remains quite hard and becomes only harder as the fraud gets a bit more sophisticated. But imagine working for an organization with your well-defined fraud definition, what the fraud risk is. You're still blind up until some sort of fraud is reported by a victim, and if you overlook it, then
if it doesn't get reported, then is there a crime? It's if there's nobody in the forest and the trees falls down, does it make a noise?
Even in the very traditional payment method like cards, and the introduction of more and more threat secure, even though risk-based, a lot of businesses and merchants are completely blind to this fraud, because not all card issuer will issue a request for information or notification of fraud. And
again, it's different in different regions. In different countries, the adoption of 3D Secure is a lot lower than it is here. Europe, better. US, it's a lot less. And again, you need the different strategies for different regions, for different verticals, for different customer types. We're saying about the type of fraud. You can't just say, right, this is fraud and this isn't fraud. Okay, right, this is fraud, but what type of fraud is it? You need different strategies to kind of combat that. Is it somebody trying to defraud the company, or is it somebody trying to defraud friends or family or somebody they don't know? Is it like a romance scam or an investment scam, or is it actually, I've got this thing delivered, I'm going to say that it wasn't delivered and I just get my refund and I get this free item? So again, it's different ways of doing it. You need to understand the whole kind of ecosystem, all these different fraud types, and how best to kind of, there isn't a one size fits all. There isn't a silver bullet that kind of solves everything.
Yeah. And the most common fraud that we have to deal with, it's mostly impersonation fraud, although on companies, arguably, it's could be even easier than impersonating an actual individual, because all of this company information is public. I guess the more general topic of abuse, whether it's no intent to pay or abuse of a dispute, like claiming goods weren't received. Or
things like synthetic ID, like you said, impersonation. You're not necessarily impersonating somebody that exists. You're impersonating somebody that doesn't exist. So if somebody doesn't exist, then who's going to report it? There isn't somebody at the end of it who's been hurt, who's had their money taken away. They've invented a person and they've used that entity to defraud the merchant or whoever. So nobody's going to put their hand up and say, "Can I have my money back?" Because where are you going to send the money back to? There isn't that end person, and that's even harder. And then what the problem is that that could be 10, 15 years down the line, and that could be linked to a social security number, and then that person then want to buy a car or a house, and they can't because they've got this bad mark against their name because of one person did this thing back in 10, 15 years ago, and it has that kind of trickle on effect on their lives.
I think that's one of the things I find really interesting about like B2B in general, like the fact that it seems so easy just to set up a fake company. And like you said, you don't have to be impersonating anyone. You could just put a random fake name down. You'd assume there'd be way more checks than there currently are in place to sort of like prove your identity, prove the legitimacy of this business, this new business.
Well, we saw that with the COVID bounce back scheme in the UK, US as well. The amount of money that's been lost to that is staggering. And again, you would think people will do more checks, but it's a numbers game. They will get through, and because there were so many in such a small amount of time, there just wasn't the resource to check them all. So they got through, and they exploited it. And these criminals, once they see a gap, they will exploit it. They, in terms of collaboration, they put us to shame. They have Telegram channels. They're not just hiding in the dark web in their hoodies up in the dark room with multiple screens. These are people do it on the surface web now. Instagram, Twitter, any social media you can think of. They're on there and they're sharing information. They're recruiting people. They're student notice boards. And they'll put a sign up and say, right, can you come and do this? So you get this amount of money, £1,000 for this, and it sounds reasonable. Actually, am I hurting anyone by having somebody put this money in my bank account and then taking it out and putting another one? Can't hurt anyone, can it?
The response is instant, I think, from fraudsters when they do get a whiff of something or they've noticed something that works. All these forums and like dark web as well.
They will share it and it just goes, and they will just hammer it and exploit it. I always use the analogy of Jurassic Park. And Connor, you're quite young, so you probably don't know this. But there was a part in there where the raptors were testing the electric fence to see where the weaknesses were. Once they found a weakness, then they just went for it. Whether the particular section wasn't electrified, but they would test it. They would see where those weaknesses were, and then just hammer it. And that's exactly what the fraudsters do and the criminals do. They find a weakness, tell everyone about it, hammer it, then the legitimate business shuts that down, and they go, okay, let's find another weakness. Let's move on. And they're not just going to stop. They found a source of income. These are established businesses. They have HR teams, they have marketing teams, they have commercial teams. They're like a fully fledged business. These we're not talking again. Like I said, we're not just talking about teenagers sitting in their bedroom. They have offices. They are huge organisations, and they have resources, and they're there to make money, and they will find a way to make money.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think nicely following on from that. So these fraudsters, we know they're quick to respond. Are there any new payment methods that you think these fraudsters have recently targeted, or do you think are potentially susceptible?
There's always new ones. If a new payment type comes out, it tends to fall out of regulations, like buy now, pay later. Buy now, pay laters or deferred invoice has been around for a long time. But there was almost a perfect storm with COVID. You had things like buy now, pay later. You had curbside pickup, which again they've been around for a long time, but they just exploded during that time because that was one of the best ways that people could sort of transact and buy stuff. People lost their jobs, people were on furlough, and they still wanted to buy stuff, and they just turned to buy now, pay later. And there was just a proliferation of companies out there offering this service, and it just wasn't regulated. And anyone, like you said, anyone can set up a business, and people set up businesses, and they just didn't have the backing, and a lot of them have kind of folded. But it was just it's just crazy. But buy now, pay later, PSD2 was going through at the same time, but buy now, pay later wasn't included in PSD2. So PSD2 went out, and then everyone's like, well, buy now, pay later is not included in that, so let's just hit buy now, pay later because it's not regulated. And if something else comes along, then again, if it falls out of regulations, and again, resource-wise, potentially you don't have the resource to have a whole new strategy for a particular payment type. So you're trying to fold it into what you've currently got. It isn't really fit for purpose. And buy now, pay later is very different to just, a normal card transaction. You have to look at the onboarding part of it, but you also have to look to the kind of continuous payment of that loan back. So you're looking at 2 different points. You see the onboarding data, you signing up for it. If that's a synthetic ID, okay, there's nothing negative linked to that because that's a new person. So, okay, they're in. We're just going to give them this amount of credit. Okay, they missed the first payment, but they pay the second one and maybe the third one. And then, this could take a long time. This isn't just your smash and grab. So you need a whole new strategy for that. And you need to understand every single part of it and make sure you get all the data to kind of be able to combat that. QR codes as well. There was a thing where you could print out QR code and people were putting them on traffic meters. Yeah. And that was the way to pay. And again, people just did it. And it's that kind of thing of people love new technology. A new iPhone comes out, everyone wants it. If there's a new way to pay, everyone wants it. Whether it's paying by a ring or your watch or this or that or anything else. There's fraud. Being in the fraud industry for this amount of time, you get frustrated because the horse is gone, and then you start to try and close the gate on it because they haven't had this thought process in mind to say, right, how can somebody use this to defraud people? That happens a long time after it's already out there in the ecosystem. People are using it, and we're always playing catch up, which is frustrating. Which comes into different organisations need to work closely together to kind of get a hold on these things and say, right, this is going live. Let's get some proper regulation in place. Let's make sure everyone's protected. Fraudsters will always find a way. They will, no matter how much protection you put in place. They'll always find a way. But let's try and limit it as much as we can. I realise I've just been talking for a long time, so I'll pass it.
No, I agree. I think that there are a couple of points where some method may attract more fraudsters than others. And I guess you sort of implied it with the innovation aspect. So that first point being, how quickly can a fraudster get hold of funds or goods that they will then resell? Yeah. Like the time element is super, I think is super important to fraudsters. Yeah. And if, sort of falls into by default in whatever, innovative payment method of there, that's quick either to get the goods or to get money out of something. And the second element is, how much can I get out? So how quickly and how much, whether it's, actual cash or value of goods. And I think, agree with you on the buy now, pay later aspect and trying to, fit existing controls, trying to resolve or mitigate the risk as quickly as possible because of that payment method exploding during COVID. Yeah, some people got burnt in this process, and we see this. Every day with Connor. So you've got the deferred payment aspect where you need to consider different data points that what you would look at, in your either typical card transaction or bank transfer transaction. But you also have on the B2B side, vast amount of, data points. It's quite different for businesses versus consumers. And the best example I usually come up with is, you need to consider, or you can consider a very high number of addresses, like physical addresses that can be related to a business. Not only you have the legal address of a business, you got trading addresses, you got officers or directors of that business. They each have correspondence addresses, but each director would also have a residential address. And then finally, you've got a delivery address. Yep. And then you may have an invoice address related to whatever payment method the person will use to repay this deferred payment. When you compare these two, what almost look like the simplistic case of card transaction where you've got a card billing address and a delivery address. Yeah. You try to fit that B2B deferred payment case to that consumer card case. Obviously, things aren't going to work too well.
Again, it doesn't work. You can't just pick it up and dump it somewhere else. It's not like cookie cutter. Everyone is different. They have their own considerations. Like you said, if you've got 5, 6, 7 different addresses compared to just 2 addresses, then you have to have a slightly different strategy, which are the key data points that we need to look at. What are the addresses that we need to actually take a look at, whether it's a change in the address within a period of time, whether it's, adding a different, a new director or something joins, and then all of a sudden the address changes and then the bank details change, and all kind of different sequences of events. There's lots of different things and caveats that you kind of have to be aware of.
Yeah. And sorry, just to add on, the timing element, I think what BNPL brought in was like this instant decision where, if you were to compare how a consumer would access a credit card or how a business would access a loan, would typically involve some degree of paperwork and some sort of delay with actually someone reviewing all of that.
Yeah, well, again, some providers did that, and they're the ones that have survived. And some would do what they call like a soft credit check, which is effectively, this is a name, yes, you're alive, you have an address that exists, that's it, here's some money. And it's terrifying. Reminds you of, the kind of the loan scandal, with people like Wonga, and that was massive back in the day, and a lot of people, lost a lot of money through that. And we were looking at it going, this is going to be another Wonga, unfortunately.
I think that's down to the fear from, some companies not being able to keep up with change. We spoke about like technology earlier and how fast it's moving. I think when BNPL, buy now pay later, kicked on, I think there was such a threat to existing businesses. It's like if they didn't just adapt and go with it,
if you weren't doing it, then you.
And I think following on from what you said earlier about a new payment method being incredibly risky, is just because they've got no experience, the historical data for what is good, what is bad. It's not there for them to sort of look at and assess. They're making very quick decisions based on what they have in front of them or what they were used to. So like Nico was talking about with B2C and delivery address and this address, that you can't just use that information and apply it to what you then want to implement. So it's risky. Another topic, how is fraud evolving in B2B? So the evolution of old MOs and new trends and, kind of similar or different to what we experienced to B2C. What are the latest fraud trends in B2B? I think we can sort of separate the two in your traditional business-related frauds that's sort of slowly adapting to the new financial products that are offered to businesses, and then the newer trends. So on that former category, so we know in the UK, not many checks done when registering a company with Companies House. Hopefully that's going to be changing soon. We don't have a date yet, but but yeah. So the more traditional fraud of setting up a business with a real identity as directors or with just made up identity as directors, and trying to access credit lines here and there. That's something I guess quite old as a fraud MO, but still here. Bit of an evolution on that is putting a little bit more effort into your fake company and going ahead with a few years of fake financials being filed. Again, not particularly new trend, I'd say, but we still see it today. And I guess what's a bit more new would be a bit of a smarter way of taking over or impersonating a company. I mean, we've seen some of that in the past, but fraudsters put more effort into registering a domain, that includes the company name that they're targeting, leaving this domain, leaving for a good year and a half. So, by the time to apply to whatever product, the domain wasn't created yesterday or a week ago. So they do try to create more of a digital footprint to be more successful in impersonating that company. I think it's maybe a bit newer. It's not new from yesterday, but more effort put into this field. And I guess newer trends, just targeting
whatever financial product they can get the benefit from the most automated way, so they can get their hands on goods or cash as quickly as they can. That really is something that I've seen over the years. You may have a very similar fraud risk between two products, but one will be heavily targeted. The one that will be heavily targeted is the one where everything could be automated, where the fraudsters wouldn't need to deal with any sort of manual intervention, because that really enables them to scale, their volume of attacks to a very low cost, and they don't need a huge success rate to make gains from it. Because as you said, they are running a business.
Yeah. I was gonna touch on sort of that scalability of it. They just want to increase the return on investment. And again, in terms of what's going on recently, Chat GPT, that's just perfect for them. Right? They're just gonna set it up, and you can use it to create malware. You can do it for coding. You can run it to have a script for your romance scam business, investment scams, all of that. And you don't need a workforce. You're cutting your overheads. Again, you're just making money, and you can do it on a much bigger scale than if you have kind of individual people doing it. Fraud and financial crime is migratory. It moves from business to business, from country to country, region to region. It moves around. If it works over here, and then let's go and try it in a different country or a different location. And again, comes back to what we were saying around those organised groups. They see this, they look for those weak points. Okay, this country shut that down. Let's go to a different country and try it there. It's the same, almost like cookie cutter operation. We've got the scripts. We just go to Google Translate and translate them into a different country and in a different language. And then just try the same thing there until that doesn't work, and then we'll go somewhere else and go somewhere else and go somewhere else. And then technology comes into that as well. Whether it's Chat GPT or even scams. That started off as your Spanish prisoner letter to your Nigerian prince email to your WhatsApp message saying it's your mum and she's lost her phone and this is her new number. It's the same inherent scam, fraud, crime, but it just adapts to new technology and how society changes and interacts with themselves, with payments, with each other.
Yeah, not to touch too much on the scam, but I used to love the Nigerian prince email. I remember when I first became aware of that. I was very young, obviously younger than you guys. I was probably in school. You were probably
when I was that young, we didn't have email, so.
But yeah, I think that's just that's a really good example of just how it's changed, how fraud has developed
in a relatively short amount of time as well.
I don't know, if I was on my school, my secondary school email account, and somebody saw that email, we'd be like, oh, this is clearly a scam. But the development that you've seen since then, what you might get, you get all these texts on your phone nowadays from your bank, and it looks legitimate, and obviously they're targeting vulnerable people, but
the sophistication has skyrocketed. It is hard, and again there is that. Have we become desensitized to this? We see it all the time. We see it in the newspapers, online, and it's just every single day. There's a story about someone being scammed, and you look at it and go, "That will never happen to me. I'm too clever for that." If everyone says that, then it's not gonna help. These are people. The way somebody described it was, if you're at the World Cup final and they take you out of the crowd and say, right, you go and goal and face a penalty against Messi, what are your chances of saving it? They're slim to none. You're going up against, in your scams and the fraud, you're going up against a professional that does this day in, day out. What are your chances of facing that and saving it? It's limited because these people were very, very good at what they do. Yeah, and again, whether that's a B2C environment or B2B, it's that human interaction. You build a bond with someone, whether it's so pig butchering, that was kind of in the press recently, where you fatten up a victim, and then you just take all the money. You butcher that kind of relationship for that kind of massive payout, and it's built on that human interaction. We are sociable animals. We want to make friends. We want to be with each other. We want to help people. And yeah, we always say, I wouldn't fall for a scam. Everyone says that until they fall for a scam. It happens to so many people. Everyone, 1 in 4 people or something like that. Everybody knows somebody who's been scammed in some way or defrauded. It's everywhere, and can't have that mentality of, oh, it will never happen to me, because that doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, and I don't think it's gonna get any better, unfortunately, in terms of victims falling for it. Because when you think about it, yeah, it's grown in sophistication like very rapidly over the last 15, 20 years, 10 years. But you still find fraudsters targeting the most vulnerable people, and you still have people that are not labeled as vulnerable falling for it.
Yeah.
So sophistication we've seen compared to the awareness build-up. When you look at the awareness build-up that may improve over the years, the sophistication is just gonna accelerate faster and quite easily, faster than the awareness level.
And it's people's perception of things as well. What are people? I mean, we're in the industry. We know what we think we know what fraud is. How it's kind of laid out in front of us. But the normal person on the street, things like delivery scams. Somebody claims non-receipt of goods. They probably don't see that as being fraud. Somebody who pirates a DVD or a CD. Actually, maybe everyone does this. It's fine. It's just one of those things. That is, it's still fraud. It's still illegal. People's perception of it changes. And again, in the current economic climate, people still want things. There's the very kind of, I say shallow, but there is that kind of, with Instagram and TV and streaming and things like that. People want the latest fashion or gadget or iPhone. People still want these things, even though they don't have the money. So they will make that switch in their head to say, I want this. How can I justify having it? I'm not saying it happens to everyone. It doesn't. But there are some people who need to do it to be able to eat. But some people actually go, I'm going to do this because I want that.
It's the perception of it being a victimless crime. And I think to a certain extent with, some of those like delivery scams, for example, you might get the business who will just be like, yeah, cool, yeah, no worries.
They're a massive company. They can afford to lose a pair of trainers. Doesn't make a difference.
The justification of being like, oh, the courier probably didn't do this or that, or I can't trust this, or that's completely reasonable. That's a valid claim. And I think it's probably on the business point of view to sort of step that up as a wider problem, to sort of be like, okay, this is apparently a really common thing where somebody is saying, we didn't receive your goods and we're losing X amount of money a year to this. Why don't we invest some money into this? And then, how much of those claims are going to be valid claims, or how many of them are going to be genuine people who have just fancied the idea of being like, I might just email and say I didn't get this and see what happens.
Yeah, again, it's that collaboration and sort of having that time and resource to investigate it. Collaborate with the warehouse team, the guys on the phone taking those calls. Have a look at, is it a particular area? Is it a particular courier company? Is it a particular courier driver? That's actually kind of drill down into understand what that problem is. Don't just go look at it, blanket approach and go, right, okay, yeah, that's fine. We'll just move on. Actually, it could lead to something else. It could be that one person that one person could be linked to 15 different people. And then actually the picture gets a lot bigger and they're linked to 15 other people individually, and it just spreads.
It's raising that awareness like across the company, not just in like a fraud team or a risk team. It's going to affect everyone, this process and that decision for that to happen. So the decision for change and awareness throughout every stage of, a customer journey or, a business's new account. It's about raising awareness everywhere that could be fraud. Oh, that could be fraud.
Yeah, we had that one back in one of our previous jobs. It was a fashion retailer, and they would send out trainers and get a single trainer back. Somebody said, oh, it's the wrong size. Oh, no, they would send it back and say, oh, there was only one trainer in the box. And they go, oh, so sorry. And they send them another one out. And then they return it again, well, there was only one trainer in the box again. And they go, oh, don't worry about it, just give me a refund. They've kept two trainers. They've got their new pair of trainers for free. And the company have lost a pair of trainers. They have just the two boxes with one trainer in. Well, the warehouse team don't speak to anyone else. The warehouse team just takes it, puts it back on the shelf. So a legitimate customer comes along and says, I want these. They get them, and there's only one in there. or they'll send back a counterfeit good because the warehouse team don't look at it and they don't speak to the customer service team, don't speak to the fraud team to say, right, this is what's going on. We need to be made aware of it so we can identify it and put a stop to it. It's that kind of silos within organizations needs to be broken down as well.
Yeah. And what I think, trying to bring this back to B2B, I feel like the fraud management or controls, have been quite advanced or have evolved on the consumer side quite a bit, if you compare it to where it was like 15 years ago. But now that B2B payments and B2B lending becomes a bit more automated and more of an attractive target, the same groups are going to be moving across and giving a shot and trying the good old rule book of, let's try A, B, C, D, because that's worked in the past.
Yeah, we tried it with B2C, this and this and this worked. Let's try it for B2B, see what works. If it doesn't, then we'll adapt, we'll change, and then we'll get through, and then we'll share that information with everyone, and then you just get targeted.
Yeah, we've kind of moved on to the last topic without the lovely little intro for it, but what can businesses do to protect themselves against fraud, like specifically B2B? So what could a B2B business do, as a very general question? Maybe not just a starting point, but what are the focus points?
I guess not the best thing to do is consider fraud in the wider set of risks you face as a business. So the point you made at the start around fraud is part of financial crime. So whenever you think about your fraud controls, you need to stay quite close to more compliance and regulatory type of risks around know your business or know your customer. And I think that's quite important. Like don't ignore know your business aspect, know your customer and related regulatory requirements on one hand, but also consider, side risks like credit risks. So you don't completely ignore, someone who's got no intent to pay. How can, your fraud controls help with that? And yeah, being close to your customer service team, to your collection team. So it's really collaboration within the business and trying to build controls so you're sure you know who you're dealing with. You get all the relevant data points you could collect, within the business to make the best decision possible. And you can deliver on the product promise to, provide the best experience possible, the lowest friction possible for the lower risk customers, and the more friction possible, and hopefully declining the higher risk customers. So I guess that's on the internal business side. But then I think you probably touched on this a lot more around industry collaboration and sharing data with other organizations, whether it's being part of SafeAS in the UK or being part of MRC more globally as a merchant. But the data sharing element, whether it's sharing the actual data points, GDPR allowing, obviously, but also sharing any insights around, trends, what are fraudsters up to?
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of those points. Having that kind of joined up strategy. What's the right hand knows what the left hand's doing, what different parts of your business are doing. Whether your marketing team are going to launch a new kind of sale and actually they don't tell the customer service team or the fraud team, and it's going to have a big impact on them. All the teams need to be kind of have that collaboration internally and kind of break down those silos. You were saying about the fraud and financial crime. One is a subset of the other, but they're also linked as well. If you're if there's a particular attack, then they need to move the money. They're moving the money via mules, and then that comes into your kind of your financial crime side of things. It's all linked. So you want to see the bigger picture. Again, it's make sure you have the right data, make sure it's in the right format, make sure you can understand it, make sure you use the right labels to understand what type of fraud it is, so you have the best strategy to kind of combat that. Industry knowledge. Again, you touched CFAS, Merchant Risk Council. Shameless plug. I sit on the European Advisory Board of the Merchant Risk Council, which is great. I sit on there with competitors of Featurespace, and we just talk as we're all passionate about what we do. We all want to fight fraud, doesn't matter who we work for. We will share intel, we will share insights and knowledge, and like I said earlier, that's what the fraudsters do. They go on social media and Telegram channels or on dark web or wherever, and they will share what works. Why don't we do the same? Why don't we say, right, this is, you're going with this strategy, you're launching buy now, pay later. I did this. This is how we dealt with that particular problem. Share that information. We're all fighting fraud, fighting financial crime. Then let's be joined up as the fraudsters are, and actually kind of get to that stage where we can be open and honest and say, right, these are the things that you need to be aware of. These are the kind of the key data points that we use that actually made a difference. Out of the 7 different addresses we have for this merchant, actually, if we look at this address and this address in combination with this, that was really powerful for us. It might not work for you, but actually we found a great kind of insight in there as well. In terms of so what else do we touch on? The kind of looking for the weakest link, the kind of quickest return on investment. What's going to be the next buy now, pay later? The bubble burst. What's the new kind of payment method? Let's be joined up around that. It's working with the regulators, working with police and organisations like Interpol around the world, and have that again that joined up view of, right, if this goes live, then what can we do? How could it be exploited? Let's try and trying to get as many movie references in here as possible. But when Star Wars, with the Death Star, there was that single point with the kind of the exhaust valve. That's what they targeted. Fraudsters will look at that and go, right, this. I'm not saying that the fraudsters are the rebellion and we're the empire. This isn't working very well. But yeah, that kind of there is a fault that can be exploited. Let's close it up as quickly as possible. By talking, by sharing information and knowledge, and working together, no matter who we work for.
I think that's probably
a bit hippie, is it?
Well, I don't know. I just think maybe that's part of the problem. But I think with fraudsters, everyone's winning from their point of view. So like, I got this. Why don't you get this? Let's all do this. Let's all jump on this.
Or they're selling it. It's fraud. Yeah. It's fraud as a service, right? Here's a book. Here's a guide of how to commit fraud. There you go.
Like a perfect step-by-step process, because they've done it. This worked for me. Go on. Yeah. But I think the problem is maybe from our point of view, not our point of view as in Hakodo, but I think from the industry side who is trying to prevent fraud, there's still an element of competitiveness. Like if your competitors, you think they're also susceptible to something, maybe there's an element of, why should I tell them about this? Because I just got hit for this, and we're gonna lose X amount of money. I still think there's an element of, it would be great if everyone could jump on these forums and everyone could be super transparent about sharing data and sharing, tips and anything that could be helpful across in the same way that fraudsters do. I just kind of think it won't happen in a perfect world, or it won't happen the way fraudsters do, because there's still that element of still my competitor.
It won't. I mean, fraudsters are competitive as well. Dark web gangs, they take each other down. They exploit each other. They hack each other. I agree. It's not a socialist utopia. It's the Jeremy Corbyn in me. But we can. We're not going to get there. No, but we can start to move towards that. We can make a bigger change than we're actually making at the moment. There's a lot we can step up. Is what I'm saying. Is there is a space, there is a gap there, and again, as I say, from being on the MRC board, number of our competitors on there, and we are quite sort of open with each other. These are the things we're seeing. These are the things we're kind of doing. I hope I don't get fired for this. But we've said actually, we'll go to an event, or we'll put something on where the 4 of us will stand together and be that kind of united front, and sort of say, look, yeah, we are in competition with each other, but we're also in competition with the fraudsters, and there's a lot more of them, and they're making a big difference. So let's get some wins. Let's in the same way that in football teams, you have your club players, but then they all get together and play for England.
And I think even more so on the B2B side, with businesses trying to digitalize the way they make business with other businesses. This area being even more new than the consumer side, the size of the market is such that will fraud become a differentiator? Probably not. There is space for a lot of players, and there is so much market to take, and being able to offer, a solution that may involve or not involve some insurance against these risks. But, when we build this B2B type of payment methods, we should try to think of how can we make sharing, as part of what we're building. Because, I think the market is so big that it's probably not like a competitive advantage on its own.
And again, you all want to be successful. Yeah, you want to be the most successful. But if you're all fighting against the same thing, but that thing is bigger than you, and you don't work together, and it takes you all down, then nobody wins. The fraudsters win.
That's quite a negative point to end on, isn't it? That's a nice last line. But yeah, I kind of think we've covered everything there. I think that was really good. Thanks, Nico, and thanks, Steve, for joining as
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Our special guest. That's
Thank
a
you.
nice little title.
Looking forward to episode 2, Connor.
No, I'm not coming back. Depends how much Ollie pays me. So yeah, I think that's us. So yeah, thanks again, Nico and Steve. That was a really good chat. I think we've covered a lot of topics there, and hopefully people listening can find it interesting. We'll put some info out about Steve and Nico and some of the topics we've discussed maybe. And yeah, please tune in to the next episode. It won't be fraud related, but I think it should be extremely interesting still. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast, and have a look on our LinkedIn, so Hakodo's LinkedIn, and also go and give Steve a follow on LinkedIn. He's got some really interesting content.